A History of Globalization by Amanda Johnson. Our world. Population upwards of 7 billion and ever increasing. As population grows and time goes on, human civilization becomes even more interconnected through a process called globalization. Globalization is defined as the intensification and acceleration of social exchange, social consciousness, and social activities that allows all types of people to interact. It is the dynamic shift towards a unified world where borders, language, ethnicity, government, etc. do not limit communication. Thanks to the growth of technology, it is now easier than ever for the 7 billion people on this planet to interact and grow as a society. However, globalization is not a new phenomenon. In this video, we will explore its historical roots. Globalization began in the prehistoric period, defined as 10,000 BCE to 3,500 BCE. During this time, prehistoric man spread across the globe in small groups of hunter-gatherers. As seen in the animals depicted here on the walls of the Lascaux caves in France, prehistoric hunter-gatherer groups were preoccupied with hunting. These groups were focused on survival, and it was not until the domestication of animals and the growth of settled farming that the possibility for globalization as we define it existed. As agrarian societies developed and the need for food was no longer the primary motive, society began to differentiate a hierarchy and allow for the growth of different social classes. The patriarchal society of settled groups, which still exists today, developed during this time. However, there was limited communication between small settled societies. The communication was limited by the little technology available, and for these reasons this period did not see much in the way of globalization. However, it was a time of great spread for humanity. However, moving into the pre-modern period, 3500 BCE to 1500 CE, larger civilizations developed which gave way to the current definition of globalization. Large cities with different classes of people began to crop up again across the ancient Near East and Asia. The invention of writing, cuneiform by the Mesopotamians as seen on this tablet, was a major leap in communication technology. Writing allowed for the recording of details such as financial accounts, which made it possible for large amounts of information to be remembered and transmitted. The eventual discovery of the Rosetta Stone, with the same passage translated into 3 ancient languages, shows that pre-modern societies communicated in various written forms. The advent of the wheel was likewise crucial for globalization. It allowed goods to be transported across long distances in carts, and architectural technology to improve. This led to the establishment of roads, which led to increased trade and communication between growing world empires. The pre-modern period was really a time for the development of large civilizations. The Egyptian Empire flourished during this time, with great advances in engineering, technology, and art. Chinese empires, with their advances in mathematics, sciences, and warfare, also developed alongside, and may have communicated with other world empires. Greek civilization cropped up during this time as well, creating a system of democracy that is the basis for many modern governments. The Greeks controlled a vast territory and flourished as a center for the arts and philosophy for many years. From 500 BCE to 500 CE, the Roman Empire was the dominant force in the Western world. Their empire was vast and went through periods of democracy and periods of absolute rulers. At its height, the Roman Empire controlled much of Western Europe. It expanded all the way into the United Kingdom, spreading Latin across the continent. Roman Latin is the origin of the Romance languages spoken throughout the world today. The Romans are also responsible for many permanent roads and buildings which still exist today. The first trade routes between Roman-controlled areas cropped up during this time. Eventually, the Roman Empire became Christianized and disintegrated into the Holy Roman Empire, which could almost be considered a proto-intergovernmental organization of the past. Independent states, of course, existed within the empire, but were controlled by the religious body of the time, the Pope. But what does the Age of Empires mean for globalization? Not only was there communication between different groups of people within the empires, there was communication between the empires themselves. It was a time for the foundation of the first global trade routes, utilizing developing transportation technology like more permanent roads, better ships, and animal-drawn carts and wagons. It was during this time that the origins of the Silk Road cropped up as trade routes, which will be focused on later. Goods traveled between empires, but so did religion, technology, and disease. The Age of Empires was a time for great technological advance, but after the Roman Empire fell, the growth of technology stalled in the Western world. For several hundred years, called the Middle Ages, very little changed in Western Europe specifically. Trade stalled as people struggled to survive in a colder climate. A system of feudalism developed, which kept lower class people down, and the upper class were able to control all the imported resources and the trade system. Eventually, the demand for foreign resources, especially spices and silk from the East, grew so high that the wealthy paid for merchants to transport goods, particularly along the Silk Road from China to Western Europe. The merchant class began to grow as population began to decline. Merchant ships became a great way to trade, as they were faster than walking, but they also brought disease. The Black Death came into Europe and other parts of the world during the Middle Ages, the 14th century, and wiped out almost one-third of the global population. This was a time where globalization may have had a negative effect on the world. Because goods and people were traveling all around, disease too was traveling with them. The ending of the Black Death marked the ending of the pre-modern period and the transition to the early modern period during the 1500s. As the Black Death faded, population began to increase and urbanize once again. Improved transportation technology allowed for the immigration of people to different parts of the world. The exchange of ideas in urban centers and the rediscovery of ideas from ancient societies brought about the Renaissance, a rebirth of art and learning in the Western world. There was now a drive to explore the rest of the world. Rulers wanted to claim new territory to acquire money, ideas, goods to trade, and religious converts. It was the goal of many to find faster routes to India, and this is why Columbus, sent by the Spanish, claimed America, originally mistaking it for India. Development during the early modern period from 1500 to 1750 was aided by the invention of the printing press and the improvement of navigation and sailing technologies. The Western world expanded, and the contact with Native American societies fits into the process of globalization, even though the effects were largely negative for the existing populations of new people in new lands. The great Central American empires were wiped out by conquistadors through bloody battles and disease, all for their resources. This period was detrimental to certain populations of people, but it opened up new trade routes and increased the desire to expand Western society, to find a new world. People came across on ships to colonize America, destroying Native American civilizations in their wake. According to Globalization, a very short introduction, upwards of 90% of the Native American populations were destroyed by disease during this time. Despite the tragic death of native populations, colonization attempts in the New World began to succeed. There was now an even greater land area on which Western countries could expand and claim resources, as they completely disregarded the claims of Native Americans. Back in Europe, increased population and urbanization led to the growth of the middle class. The merchant class began to create a more modern capitalist economy. The Protestant Reformation brought into question the absolute sovereignty of rulers. The amount of small kingdoms began to decline, eventually culminating in the 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia, which established the modern nation-state system in place today. In terms of globalization, there were now larger countries with borders that did not necessarily fit the ethnic groups contained within them, leading to tension down the line. During this time as well, the Dutch and British East India Companies began to establish trading posts throughout the world. This eventually led to a system of imperialism as countries wanted to gain more resources, but was also important to the furtherance of globalization as people and new ideas were transported around the world along with goods. The modern period, designated by globalization a very short introduction as 1750 to 1980, was headed off by a time known as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a time where philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire met up and came up with ideas such as natural rights, life, liberty, and property. The belief in these rights are the basis of the American Revolution, beginning in 1776. The American Revolution was the start of many revolutions against monarchies and the formation of new democracies. America was founded on the capitalistic economic system, led and molded by Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. This inspired the French, all the way across the ocean, to rebel against their monarchy as well. The late 18th and early 19th centuries were a time of revolution. The democratic systems put in place by new republics still carry on today, and America inspired much of the world. With protections for the freedom of speech and religion, among others, democracies furthered the pace of globalization, because in theory, people could travel to democratic lands and be accepted regardless of their ideas. The foundation of America led to an increase in immigration due to the prosperous democratic country. It was also the beginning of industrialization in America and Europe, and there was greater urbanization and more jobs available than ever before. The 1800s saw waves of immigration, especially by Europeans fleeing famine and seeking a better life. America became known as a cultural melting pot, and ideas from all over the world traveled there and grew. This time was known for great leaps in technological invention that made communication easier than ever before. With increased technology came an increased need for territory and resources, leading to the expansion of imperialism. Imperialism may have benefited certain powerful Western countries, but was detrimental to the lands they occupied. However, global trade greatly increased during this time, leading to greater prosperity and urbanization than ever seen before. Borders established during the earlier settlements in the Peace of Westphalia also created tension during this time. World War I began due to the violence in the ethnically diverse Balkan Peninsula. The war was a clash of old and new fighting styles and technology, which led to the death of many, and for the first time, large coalitions of countries were pitted against each other. Eventually, troubles in Russia led to their own internal revolution, which began during the First World War. This established another new system of government besides democracy, communism. While the West feared the rise of the communist system, it had other problems. The Treaty of Versailles, written at the end of World War I, laid in place tensions which would later lead to another World War. It was during this time as well when Woodrow Wilson proposed the first intergovernmental organization, the League of Nations. While America declined to join, countries in Europe banded together in the League of Nations to try and prevent further tragedies such as World War I. The Great Depression hit America after World War I, causing the decline of the economy. But it also affected the economy of the entire world, showing the interconnections that were beginning to form economically due to globalism. Globalization had allowed world trade and production to become so intertwined with the American economy that when the Great Depression hit in 1929, both of these things fell dramatically. It took years and many new systems for the world to climb out of the Great Depression. World War II involved again large groups of countries working together to defeat a common enemy, the Axis powers. It also gave a way for America to continue its climb as a global superpower, working its way up from the Great Depression. Old world empires were no longer the dominant power in the world, and interaction with other countries outside of what is considered the West began to grow. This period saw a massive increase in global population and a massive increase in transnational communication. Global companies began to crop up during this time. It was after World War II where communism became the main threat. The United States feared the growth of communism because the USSR was becoming another global superpower. The technological development of nuclear weapons mutually assured the destruction of the two countries if they were to ever face off, which caused a Cold War. Eventually, though, American democracy and the capitalist system won over the USSR and the Berlin Wall fell. 1980 was the end of the modern period and saw the shift into the contemporary period which we are currently in. The Berlin Wall fell, heading off the era where capitalism and American governmental and economic systems seemed to have become the model for all developing countries to follow. The recent decades have seen the rise of intergovernmental organizations like the European Union and the United Nations. Recently, as well, international trade groups like Asian and the economic systems like the International Monetary Fund have cropped up. This begs the question, is the next step in globalization the elimination of traditional borders in favor of the governance of organizations like these? I feel that the history of globalization shows us how far we have come. We are moving together as a society to solve greater world issues. No longer can world problems be contained merely by borders, as they have grown too large and affect too many people. For example, there is an increased importance placed on education. The history of globalization shows as people become more educated and develop new technology, their overall quality of life improves. For example, Malala Yousafzai has brought to attention the need for women's education as an end to violence in the Middle East and other areas of the world. If people were more educated and aware, perhaps they would be likewise more conscious of their environmental impact. If we do not change, the environment will no longer be able to adequately sustain our growing population. The entirety of human history has been about growth and progress, and I feel as we grow more interconnected through globalization, we need to reflect on how we can progress while improving the lives of everyone on the planet. Globalization is defined as the intensification and acceleration of social exchange, consciousness, and activities, allowing all types of people to interact. Throughout history, people have been growing more and more conscious of social problems. With our history in mind, I predict that the increased power of IGOs rather than the traditional nation-state will lead to a more harmonious world. History shows there will always be conflict, but overall, the lives of people on Earth are improving due to the process of globalization.